Zextar stood at attention, his forearms pressed firmly against his sides as Commander Velanax paced before him. The commander's skin glowed a dull orange, showing mild irritation. "Cadet Zextar, your combat scores are exceptional, Commander," Velanax said. "Your tactical analysis skills are among the highest in your class. This is why I find your new assignment suitable." Zextar's inner eyelids blinked rapidly in confusion. Suitable? Not prestigious or challenging, just suitable? Thank you, Commander. May I ask what my assignment will be? The commander stopped pacing and looked down at Zextar from his full height. You will study the military history of a lesser species. The humans of Earth, the Dominion Council is considering their planet for annexation within the next 5 cycles. Zextar felt his hopes sink. Archive duty? While his fellow cadets would be assigned to border patrols or training missions with actual combat possibilities, he would be watching recordings of primitive aliens. The assignment begins tomorrow. You will report to the Archival Wing, subsection 17, Earth Studies. Your primary contact will be the human specimen we acquired during first contact. It serves as a curator of sorts, a living human. Zextar couldn't hide his surprise. Here at the Academy? Yes, the specimen has been cooperative in organizing their military records. You will learn what you can about their tactics, identify their weaknesses, and prepare a comprehensive report for the Invasion Council. Zextar saluted with all 4 arms. I will not disappoint, Commander. See that you don't. Remember, cadet knowledge of an enemy is a weapon sharper than any blade. The next morning, Zextar made his way through the sprawling Academy complex to the Archival Wing. Subsection 17 was located in the oldest part of the building. Far from the prestigious training grounds and simulation chambers, the door slid open to reveal a surprisingly large room filled with strange equipment. Screens of various sizes lined the walls, and in the center stood a creature Zextar had only seen in briefings. The human was smaller than Zextar had expected, with only 2 arms and legs. It had patches of fur on top of its head and on parts of its face. It wore the gray jumpsuit given to all non-military personnel on base. You must be the new cadet, the human said in surprisingly good Drivian, though its single-tongued mouth struggled with some of the clicks. I'm Frank Miller. Zextar didn't offer his name in return. There was no need to be friendly with a study specimen. I am here to learn about Earth's military history and tactics, Zextar said stiffly. The human, Frank, smiled. The expression was strange to Zextar, who was used to Dravian emotional displays through skin color changes. Well, you've come to the right place. I've organized about 6,000 years of human warfare. Where would you like to start? Zextar hadn't expected to be asked for preferences. From the beginning, of course. A logical progression? Frank nodded. Logical indeed. Ancient warfare it is. He moved to a control panel and began pressing buttons. Most cadets assigned here usually want to skip to our space battles right away. That would be inefficient, Zextar replied. 2. Understand a species' military evolution, one must start with its foundations. Something changed in the human's expression. Interesting, you're the first to say that. The main screen lit up, showing primitive humans holding simple weapons, spears and shields. The Battle of Kadesh, 1274 BCE, before Common Era, Frank explained. One of our earliest recorded major battles with detailed tactics. The Egyptian forces under Pharaoh Ramesses II against the Hittite Empire. Zextar watched with mild interest as the animation showed the battle unfolding. The weapons were laughably primitive, but he noted with surprise how the smaller force used terrain and deception to gain advantage. These Egyptians were outnumbered, yet they divided their forces, Zextar observed. Dravian doctrine forbids dividing forces when at a numerical disadvantage. Frank smiled again. Humans often ignore what doctrine forbids when the situation calls for it. For the next few hours, Frank showed Zextar more ancient battles. The human explained concepts like flanking maneuvers, false retreats, and guerrilla warfare, tactics that seemed chaotic and undisciplined to Zextar's Drivian sensibilities. These methods lack honor, Zextar said after watching a simulation of Hannibal's victory at Cannae. Frank's expression changed again, this time to something Zextar couldn't interpret. Honor doesn't protect your people from extinction, Frank said quietly. Results do. As the day continued, they moved forward. In time, Zextar watched as human weapons evolved from swords to gunpowder to machines. What surprised him most was how warfare remained fundamentally similar despite technological advances. Humans still valued surprise, deception, and adaptability over strict formations and overwhelming force. We will continue tomorrow with the Great War, Frank said, as the Academy's time cycle came to an end. That's when things really started to change. Zextar found himself oddly reluctant to leave. This Napoleon figure, his tactics were unusual. He was a genius, Frank said, pride evident in his voice, though not without flaws. Zextar returned to his quarters that night with much to consider. He had expected to find primitive, predictable tactics from a lesser species. Instead, he had witnessed surprising ingenuity and adaptability. Still, these were ancient battles with primitive technology. Surely, once humans developed more advanced weapons, they would adopt the obvious superiority of structured Drivian-style warfare. The next day, Zextar arrived early at the archive. Frank seemed pleased to see him. Ready for the 20th century? This is where warfare gets truly terrible. Zextar settled in as the screens displayed a conflict Frank called World War I. What he saw disturbed him deeply. Millions of humans dying in trenches, poison gas, machines' guns mowing down waves of soldiers. This is barbaric, Zextar said. Why would they continue fighting with such losses? Frank's face grew somber. That's the question, isn't it? Why do we keep fighting when all seems lost? After lunch break, they moved to World War II. Zextar watched in growing unease as humans developed even more deadly weapons and tactics, yet somehow maintained their will to fight despite devastating losses. These resistance fighters in occupied territories, Zextar noted. They had no chance of victory, yet they continued to fight against overwhelming odds, Frank nodded. Humans don't always fight because they think they can win. Sometimes they fight because they can't imagine living if they don't. As the day ended, Frank pulled out a small data crystal. I wasn't going to show you this yet, but you seem different from the other cadets. This contains unedited footage from humanity's first contact with a hostile alien species. It's not in the official curriculum. Zextar's inner eyelids blinked. Rapidly, is this permitted? Frank shrugged. You're here to learn about human warfare, aren't you? This is the most relevant material of all. Against his better judgment, Zextar reached out and took the crystal. Tomorrow, Frank said, we'll continue with the official materials. But watch this tonight. It might help you understand what you're really studying here. Zextar returned to his quarters, the unauthorized data crystal feeling heavy in his pocket. His assignment was suddenly much more complicated than he had expected. Zextar waited until the lights in the cadet quarters dimmed for sleep cycle before he inserted the crystal Frank had given him into his personal viewing device. His heart beat faster than normal. Viewing unauthorized materials was a serious offense in the Dravian Military Academy. Yet his curiosity was too strong to ignore. The screen lit up with grainy footage, a human settlement on a distant moon colony. The date stamp showed it was from 20 Earth years ago. The humans had barely begun to spread beyond their home planet. At that time, the footage showed a small outpost with only basic defenses. A settlement of miners and their families, not a military base. Then, without warning, a ship appeared in the sky. Zextar recognized it immediately as a Kravik ship, a species known for their brutality in slave raids. Zextar watched as the 32 humans at the outpost received the message that help was at least 3 days away. The Kravik landing party numbered over 200 warriors, each nearly twice the size of an average human and heavily armed. Surrender and you may live as slaves, the Kravik commander announced in the universal translation frequency. Resist and die, the human leader stepped forward, a male with gray in his hair and a weathered face. I'm Ben Sawyer, colony supervisor. We've got women and children here. Let them go, and the rest of us will surrender. The Kravik commander laughed. All humans are useful. Choose now, slavery or death, the humans retreated to discuss. The footage cut to inside their main building. Zextar leaned closer, intrigued. By what he was seeing, we can't win, a woman said. We have mining lasers and a few personal weapons, that's it. Ben Sawyer looked around the room. We don't need to win. We just need to hold out for 3 days until the Navy arrives. 3 days against those monsters? Another man said. Impossible, maybe, Ben said. But I'd rather die free than live as their slave. Anyone who wants to surrender can go now. No one moved. All right then, Ben said. Let's make these 3 days count. What followed left Zextar stunned. The humans converted their mining equipment into weapons and traps. They used their knowledge of the terrain to create kill zones. Instead of fighting like a conventional military unit, they fought like what Frank had called guerrilla fighters. By the end of the first day, the humans had lost 8 of their people, but the Kraviks had lost over 50 warriors. The Kravik commander, enraged, ordered a full assault rather than the careful approach they had been taking. That's when the humans sprang their main trap. They had rigged their reactor to overload in a controlled way, creating an electromagnetic pulse that disabled the Kravik weapons and communications. In the confusion, the humans attacked with mining picks and improvised explosives. By the end of the second day, only 15 humans remained. But the Kravik force was down to less than 100, and their commander was dead. On the third day, with just 7 humans still fighting, a Navy ship arrived 12 hours early. They had pushed their engines beyond safety limits after receiving the distress call. The remaining Kraviks were captured or killed. The footage ended with the Navy captain asking Ben Sawyer how they had managed to hold out so long against such overwhelming odds. Ben, wounded and exhausted, simply said, "Humans don't calculate odds. We just do what needs to be done." Zextar sat in silence long after the footage ended. In Drevian military doctrine, those humans should have surrendered immediately. The battle was unwinnable by any logical analysis. Fighting would only lead to death rather than the possibility of eventual escape from slavery, yet they had fought. And somehow, against all probability, they had held out long enough. Sleep eluded Zextar that night. He kept seeing the faces of those humans as they prepared for a battle. They had no logical reason to believe they could survive. The next morning, Zextar arrived at the archive earlier than required. Frank was already there, organizing some materials. You watched it, Frank said. It wasn't a question. Yes. Zextar's skin flickered between blue uncertainty and green curiosity. Those humans should have surrendered. The tactical analysis was clear. Frank smiled slightly. Yet they didn't. Why? The question burst from Zextar with more emotion than he had intended to show. That's what you're here to understand, isn't it? Frank turned to the main screen. Today we move to more recent conflicts. The water wars of the 2070s, the lunar border dispute, the first contact crisis. Throughout the day, Zextar watched with new interest. He began to see patterns in human warfare that defied Drevian military logic. Humans frequently ignored what should have been obvious strategic retreats. They sacrificed positions of strength to save civilians with no military value. They divided their forces when they should have concentrated them, and somehow, again and again, it worked. The unifying factor seems to be adaptation, Zextar said as they reviewed the Battle of New Atlanta. Humans constantly change their tactics based on immediate conditions rather than following established doctrine. Frank nodded. We call it thinking on your feet or improvising. It's highly valued in human military tradition. In Drevian military, such behavior would be punished, Zextar said. Orders must be followed exactly, even if those orders lead to defeat. Zextar had no answer for that. As the day ended, Frank handed Zextar another data crystal. The Battle of Orbital Station Freedom. Not classified this time, but not usually shown to cadets until later in their studies. Why show me now? Zextar asked. Because you're asking the right questions, Frank said. Most cadets just see our victories as flukes or the result of our enemies' mistakes. You're seeing the pattern. That night, Zexstar watched the new footage. It showed a space battle between human forces and an aggressive species called the Vormok. The humans were outgunned and outnumbered. Their ships were older, slower, less well-armed, yet by the battle's end, the humans had won. They had used the debris field from their own destroyed vessels to create navigation hazards. They had turned cargo ships into makeshift bombers. The captain of one damaged vessel had even ordered his ship to power down completely, appearing dead in space only to power up and attack from behind when the enemy passed. Zexstar realized he was witnessing something his training had never prepared him for. The humans didn't fight according to any rules or patterns he could identify, and that made them more dangerous than any species the Drevian Dominion had ever encountered. 3 weeks had passed since Zexstar began his assignment in the archives. His fellow cadets had noticed the change in him. At mealtimes, he sat alone, lost in thought rather than joining the usual boasting about combat simulations. His skin often showed the blue-green ripple pattern of deep contemplation, a rare sight among young cadets who typically displayed the bright red of aggression or the steady purple of discipline. Commander Relanax had noticed too. After morning drills, he pulled Zexstar aside. "Your instructors tell me you've been asking unusual questions in tactical class," the commander said, his skin pulsing with cautious orange. "Questions about human warfare." Zexstar stood at attention. "Yes, Commander. I believe understanding our potential enemies is important. Understanding, yes. Admiration, no." Relanax leaned closer. "The human curator is not your friend, Cadet. He is a specimen, a resource to be used. Remember your purpose, to identify weaknesses, not strengths." "Of course, Commander. I'm simply being thorough." Relanax seemed unsatisfied but dismissed him with a warning. "Your report to the Invasion Council is due in 2 weeks. Make sure it focuses on how to defeat the humans, not how impressive you find them." Later that day, Zexstar arrived at the archive to find Frank sorting through physical objects rather than digital files. "What are these?" Zexstar asked. Frank held up a small piece of metal attached to a chain. "Dog tags. Identification worn by soldiers. These belong to soldiers who fought in various conflicts." He handed one to Zexstar. "This one belonged to Private Henry Lewis, killed in action during the Second Battle of Mars." Zexstar held the small metal piece carefully. It seemed so fragile, yet it had survived while its owner had not. "Today," Frank said, putting the tags away, "I thought we might look at something different. The psychological aspects of human warfare." Zexstar's inner eyelids blinked rapidly. This was entering dangerous territory. Commander Vrelenax would not approve, but his curiosity was too strong. "What do you mean by psychological aspects?" Frank activated the main screen. "In human warfare, the mental state of soldiers is considered as important as their physical training or equipment. Fear, courage, loyalty, hatred, these emotions can determine the outcome of battles as much as superior firepower." The screen showed training videos for human soldiers. Unlike Drevian training, which focused on obedience and doctrine, human training seemed designed to build what Frank called unit cohesion, a bond between soldiers that made them fight harder, to protect each other. "This is why humans rarely surrender even when defeat is certain," Frank explained. "They're not fighting for abstract concepts like empire or dominion. They're fighting for each other." Zexstar thought about this. "Drevians fight for the glory of the Dominion and the orders of our superiors. Personal attachments are discouraged as they might conflict with orders." Frank nodded. "Different approaches. But tell me, Zexstar, which soldiers would fight harder? Those who fear punishment from their commanders, or those who would die before letting down their friends?" The question lingered in the air between them. Next, Frank showed footage of human civilians during wartime. People who were not soldiers, helping each other after attacks, sharing food during shortages, hiding resistance fighters from enemy forces. "Why do they do this?" Zexstar asked. "They risk punishment or death to help others. It's illogical." "Humans call it compassion," Frank said, "or solidarity. The understanding that we're all connected, Frank paused, then said quietly, "There's something I haven't shown you yet. It's in the restricted section. Records of human resistance movements against occupying forces." Zextar knew he should refuse. His assignment was nearly complete. He had enough information for his report, but "Show me," he said. Frank led him to a sealed door at the back of the archive. He placed his hand on a scanner, and the door slid open to reveal a smaller room filled with more screens and storage units. "This section contains information about how humans fight when they've been conquered," Frank explained. "Your superiors rarely allow cadets to see this. They fear it might give the wrong impression." For the next several hours, Zextar watched in stunned silence. He saw how humans under occupation never truly accepted defeat. They formed underground networks. They sabotaged enemy equipment. They passed information to each other through secret codes. Children as young as 10 carried messages. Elderly people hid weapons. Everyone participated. Most disturbing of all, occupation seemed to unite humans who had previously been enemies. Old hatreds were set aside to fight the new common enemy. The Vral thought they had conquered the Northern Alliance. Frank narrated as they watched footage from a conflict on Earth. They controlled all major cities and military bases. Victory was declared. His voice took on a harder edge. 3 years later, not a single Vral remained alive on Earth. How? Zextar asked. The Vral are known for their brutality and thoroughness. That was their mistake, Frank said. Their cruelty united us. A resistance fighter captured in New Washington gave this speech before his execution. The screen showed a human male, badly beaten but standing straight as he addressed a crowd. "You can kill me," the man said. "You can kill everyone in this city, but humans will never accept your chains. Each death creates 10 new resistance fighters. We will fight in the daylight and the dark. We will fight with guns and with bare hands. We will fight until our last breath, and then our children will pick up our weapons and continue. Freedom is worth any price." The Vral commander executed him after that speech. But the cameras caught something the Vral missed: the faces in the crowd. The determination that replaced fear. 3 weeks later, that same Vral commander was found dead in his quarters. The resistance had grown exponentially. As the day ended, Zextar sat in silence, trying to process everything he had seen. "I have one more thing to show you," Frank said, "but not here. The files are too closely monitored." He handed Zextar a small data cube. "This contains records of the Proxima campaign. The only time your people, the Drivians, encountered humans in battle." Zextar's skin paled. "That's impossible. I would have learned about it in our history classes. Would you?" Frank asked. "Watch it in private. Then decide what kind of report you want to write for your invasion council?" That night, in his quarters, Zextar inserted the data cube with trembling hands. What he saw changed everything he believed about his people, his military, and the coming invasion of Earth. The mighty Dravian fleet had indeed encountered humans 20 cycles ago. They had followed standard doctrine, expecting the humans to behave like other conquered species. The humans did not. The footage showed the aftermath of battles where Drivian forces had been decimated not by superior technology, but by humans who simply refused to follow the expected rules of engagement. The campaign had been classified, the failure hidden, and now the Dominion was planning to try again. Zextar knew what his duty required. He should report Frank for sharing classified information. He should write his report emphasizing human weaknesses and recommending standard invasion protocols. But for the first time in his life, Zextar questioned whether his duty to the Dominion aligned with the truth. Zextar didn't sleep that night. The data cube from Frank had shown him a truth that shattered his understanding of the Drivian military. Their previous encounter with humans had been a disaster, yet it had been hidden from military history. The invasion force had followed perfect Drivian doctrine, and they had been defeated by an enemy who refused to follow the expected rules of warfare. As morning arrived, Zextar faced a choice. His report to the Invasion Council was due in 10 days. He could write what was expected, an analysis of human weaknesses and recommended invasion tactics. Or he could tell the truth as he now understood it, that an invasion of Earth would likely end in costly defeat. When he arrived at the archive that morning, Frank seemed to sense his inner conflict. "You watched the Proxima files," Frank said. It wasn't a question, yes. Zextar's skin displayed a mix of colors that reflected his confusion. Why wasn't this defeat recorded in our history? Frank leaned against the console. Would your leaders admit they had encountered a species that could defeat them? Would they admit their perfect military doctrine failed? Zextar had no answer. The Drevian educational system taught that their military had never known true defeat, only temporary setbacks. The idea that humans had actually forced a Drevian retreat was unthinkable. "I must write my report soon," Zextar said quietly. "And what will you say?" Frank asked. "I don't know yet." That day, instead of showing more archive footage, Frank took Zextar to a different section of the archive. It contained physical books, an outdated technology that humans still sometimes used. "These are personal accounts," Frank explained. "Journals and letters from soldiers and civilians during wars. The human experience of conflict in their own words." Zextar picked up one small book with a worn cover. "What is this one?" "The Diary of Kelly Ward. She was a doctor during the Mars Colony Uprising. She treated wounded on both sides of the conflict." Zextar read for hours. The words of humans who had lived through war affected him differently than the tactical footage. He had been studying. He read accounts of soldiers fighting not for glory or conquest, but to protect their homes and families. He read about civilians risking their lives to help strangers during bombing raids. He read about enemies showing unexpected mercy to each other. One journal entry particularly struck him. A soldier named Peter Cole had written, "I don't hate the enemy soldiers. They're following orders, same as me. But I'll kill them without hesitation to protect my buddies and to get home to my family." That's the strange thing about war. It's not about hatred, it's about love. We fight hardest for what we love most. The concept was alien to Drevian military philosophy, which taught that perfect emotional control and absolute obedience were the keys to victory. Love was seen as a weakness, not a strength. As evening approached, Frank said, "Tomorrow is my assigned rest day. You'll have a different supervisor." Zextar felt a strange disappointment. Who will it be? Another human. Sam Baker. He follows the official curriculum more strictly than I do. Frank hesitated, then added, "Whatever you decide to write in." "Your report, Zextar, remember that lives depend on it, both human and Drevian." The next day, Zextar met Sam Baker, a younger human with a much more formal manner than Frank. Sam showed Zextar the officially approved materials about human military weaknesses, their dependence on supply lines, their emotional decision-making, their factional conflicts. But Zextar could now see these weren't weaknesses at all. Humans adapted when supplies were cut off. Their emotional decisions often led to unexpected victories. Their factional conflicts disappeared when faced with an external threat. That night, Zextar began writing his report. Instead of the expected analysis focusing on how to defeat humans, he wrote a detailed assessment of why an invasion would likely fail. He included data from the classified Proxima campaign, knowing this alone could end his military career. He outlined how human resistance movements operated, how their decentralized command structure made them resilient, and how their psychological makeup made them fight harder when facing overwhelming odds. He wrote through the night, driven by a conviction that he was doing something important. By morning, he had completed the most thorough analysis of human warfare ever compiled by a Drevian. When he returned to the archive, Frank had returned from his rest day. Zextar showed him the report. "You understand this will end your career," Frank said after reading it. "Possibly worse." "I know," Zextar replied. "But it's the truth. An invasion of Earth would cost millions of Drevian lives and still likely end in failure." Frank studied him carefully. "Why does that matter to you?" "They're just humans, a lesser species according to your people." Zextar's skin shifted to the deep blue of sincerity. "Because unnecessary death is wrong, regardless of species." And because the Dominion's leaders are making a decision based on false information, they don't know what I know now, Frank nodded slowly. What will you do after you submit this? I don't know, Zextar admitted, but I can't go back to believing what I did before. 3 days later, Zextar stood before the Invasion Council, a group of 9 senior military commanders including Commander Vrelinax. They had read his report, and their skin colors showed varying shades of anger and disbelief. Cadet Zextar, the head counselor said, his skin a dangerous dark red, you were assigned to identify human weaknesses to exploit. Instead, you have produced this document that not only praises human military capabilities but also references classified information about the Proxima campaign. How do you explain this breach of duty? Zextar stood tall, his forearms at perfect attention even as his skin showed calm blue determination. Council members, I have fulfilled my duty to the Dominion by providing an accurate assessment based on all available information. To recommend invasion tactics I believe would fail would be the true breach of duty. Commander Vrelinax leaned forward. The human has corrupted you. You've been compromised by enemy influence. No, Commander, Zextar replied. I've been influenced by truth. The footage doesn't lie. The historical accounts don't lie. Humans are unlike any species we have encountered. They don't fight like we do, they don't think like we do, and they don't surrender like other species do. The council room fell silent. Finally, the head counselor spoke. Cadet Zextar, you are hereby relieved of duty pending a full investigation into your conduct and possible species sympathy. Guards escort him to containment. As 2 guards moved to take him away, Zextar knew his military career was over. But for the first time since beginning his assignment, he felt something unexpected, peace. He had told the truth regardless of the consequences, and somewhere deep inside, he wondered if that made him a little more like the humans he had been studying. The containment cell was small but clean. Zextar had been there for 5 days. His once promising military career was now over. The investigation into his species sympathy was merely a formality. His fate had been decided the moment he submitted his honest report about humans. Yet he felt no regret. Each day he reviewed his decision and found it correct. The truth mattered more than his career. Preventing an unnecessary war that would cost millions of lives on both sides mattered more than his personal future. On the 6th day, the cell door opened. Zextar expected guards to take him to his formal hearing. Instead, Frank Miller walked. And they're letting you visit me? Zextar asked, surprised. Frank smiled slightly. Not exactly. Things have become complicated. He sat on the single chair in the cell. Your report has caused quite a stir. How would you know that? Because copies of it have spread throughout the junior officer corps. Someone leaked it. Zextar asked. Skin paled. That's impossible. The report was classified. Yet it happened. And now, many young officers are asking questions about the Proxima campaign and why it was hidden from military history. Zextar couldn't believe it. He had expected his report to be buried, not circulated. There's more, Frank continued. 3 senior commanders on the Invasion Council have called for a reassessment of the Earth invasion plan. They're citing your analysis as evidence that the current strategy is flawed. Why are you telling me this? Frank leaned forward. Because your trial begins tomorrow, and I wanted you to know that your sacrifice wasn't meaningless. You've already changed minds. Zextar's skin rippled with emotion. Will it be enough to stop the invasion? I don't know. But it's created doubt, and doubt can be powerful. Frank glanced at the door. I can't stay long. The guards think I'm here for a final debriefing before your trial. What will happen to me? Frank's expression grew serious. Best case? Dishonorable discharge from the military. Worst case? They might classify you as a security risk and place you in permanent containment. Zextar had expected as much. But hearing it spoken aloud made it real. I have an alternative to offer, Frank said quietly. It's dangerous and would mean leaving everything behind. But you would be free. What do you mean? There's a human diplomatic outpost on the far side of the capital city. If you could reach it, you could claim asylum. The peace treaty between our worlds would protect you. Zexstar stared at Frank. You're suggesting I escape? That's impossible. The security here is focused on keeping people out, not keeping one cadet in, Frank interrupted, and I have help. From his pocket, Frank produced a small device. This will deactivate your door lock tonight at exactly midnight. The patrol schedule leaves a 3-minute gap on the east corridor. If you take that route, you can reach the service tunnel that leads outside the complex. Why would you risk helping me? Frank's eyes showed a sadness Zexstar hadn't seen before. Because in the 3 years I've been a guest here, you're the first Drivian who saw humans as people worth saving, not just enemies to be conquered. That matters to me. He handed Zexstar a small datapad. This has a map to the diplomatic outpost. Once you're there, ask for Sarah Powell. Tell her Frank sent. He stood to leave. The choice is yours. Trial tomorrow or escape tonight. After Frank left, Zexstar sat motionless for a long time. Escape would confirm his guilt. He would never see his home again. Yet staying meant certain punishment for telling a truth the Dominion didn't want to hear. As midnight approached, Zexstar made his decision. The device worked exactly as Frank had said. The door slid open silently. The corridor was empty. Zexstar moved quickly, following the memorized route. His heart pounded with each step. Twice he had to hide as guards passed, but he eventually reached the service tunnel. The night air felt strange after days in containment. The capital city glowed with lights in the distance. Zexstar consulted the datapad and began walking. Hours later, exhausted and nervous, he reached the human diplomatic outpost. It was a small, unimpressive building surrounded by a simple fence. A single guard stood at the entrance. Halt, the human guard said as Zexstar approached. State your business. I seek asylum, Zexstar said in careful human English. Frank. Miller sent me. I need to speak with Sarah Powell. The guard studied him for a moment, then spoke into a communication device. Minutes later, a human female appeared. I'm Sarah Powell, she said. You mentioned Frank Miller? Yes, he helped me escape. I am Zexstar, formerly a cadet in the Drivian military. I wrote a report arguing against the invasion of Earth, and now I'm accused of species sympathy. Sarah's expression changed to one of concern. Come inside quickly. Once you cross our threshold, you're under diplomatic protection. Zexstar stepped through the gate, leaving his old life behind. 6 months later, Zexstar sat in a conference room on Earth. Across from him was Colonel Olivia Brown of Earth's Defense Force. Your information has been invaluable, she said. The tactical insights you've provided about Drivian military doctrine have helped us prepare defensive measures. Zexstar nodded. After receiving asylum, he had been brought to Earth as a consultant. He had spent months explaining Drivian tactics, technology, and weaknesses. There's news from the Dominion, Colonel Brown continued. Our intelligence indicates that the invasion plan has been postponed indefinitely. The official reason is strategic reassessment, but our sources suggest there's been significant debate within the military leadership. My report, Zexstar said. Frank told me it was circulating among junior officers. Apparently it reached much further than that. There's now a growing faction in the Drivian military advocating for diplomatic relations rather than conquest. Zexstar felt a wave of relief. His sacrifice had meant something. We have a proposal for you, Colonel Brown said. Earth's military academy would like you to teach a course on comparative military theory. Your unique perspective as someone who understands both Drivian and human approaches to warfare would be invaluable for our officer candidates. You would trust me to teach your future military leaders? Colonel Brown smiled. You gave up everything to prevent a war between our species. That's the kind of ethical thinking we want to encourage. Later that day, Zexstar stood at a viewing window in the Earth Defense Headquarters, looking out at the human city spread below. It was chaotic compared to the geometric precision of Drivian cities. People of different sizes, colors, and styles moved in unpredictable patterns. It reminded him of human military tactics, seemingly disorganized but effective. Frank Miller. appeared beside him. After Zextar's escape, Frank had been recalled to Earth, his mission as an informant complete. Having second thoughts? Frank asked. No, Zextar replied. But I am thinking about what I learned in those archives. About why humans fight the way they do. And what conclusion did you reach? Zextar turned to face his friend. Humans don't fight to conquer or to follow orders. They fight to protect what they love. And that makes them more dangerous than any species that fights simply because they're told to, Frank nodded. That's what I hope you'd understand. I do now, Zextar said. And I think that's the most important lesson I can teach your future officers. That the strongest warrior isn't the one with the most weapons or the most rigid discipline. It's the one with the most to lose. As they looked out at the city together, Zextar knew he had found a new purpose. Not as a Drevian military officer, but as a bridge between two species that had almost become enemies. His journey through the war archives had changed him forever, and perhaps changed the future of both worlds as well.